Good morning. We are at 10:10, so I should probably get started. Hi, thank you for coming to my talk. This is my first in-person talk at a conference that's not pre-recorded, so if I have any hiccups along the way, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you so much. I'm assuming that most of you are here because you're interested in pair programming. Either you're already pair programming and you want to improve your pair programming habits, or you want to incorporate more pair programming into your mentorship practices. And I am very excited to share with you my personal experiences with pair programming and hopefully send you home feeling more excited about pair programming with your mentees and your colleagues, and give you some more tips and tricks and tools that you can use to improve that process. So first of all, who the heck am I, and why should you care what I have to say about pair programming and mentorship? My name is Emily Harber, Emmy. Some people call me Pixie. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. I am a semi-self-taught bootcamp graduate, and I graduated in early 2020 and have been a developer at Shopify ever since. And I work on the docs and API libraries team, working on really interesting stuff like our TypeScript and Ruby libraries and our developer documentation site, which actually got a really nice refresh recently. So if you haven't checked it out, highly recommend. And more recently, I have transitioned into providing mentorship for an intern, and it's been a really excellent teaching and learning opportunity for me to be able to pair with her and get to work with her in that capacity. So how did I get interested in pair programming? As I mentioned, I went to a boot camp, and while I was in that boot camp program, I spent a lot of time pairing with technical coaches who pretty exclusively taught using the Socratic Method during our pairing sessions. And so if you're not familiar, the Socratic Method is essentially a system of, rather than providing direct answers to a student's questions, you open a dialogue and ask leading questions and help your student to come to their own conclusions and find their own solutions to their questions or their problems. And I really appreciated this teaching technique because it felt a lot more like the real world scenario of how we work on code and how we solve problems. Rather than spoon feeding me answers, my technical coaches would lead me to the right resources and help me find my own solutions. And so about 4 months after graduating from this program, I was hired as a developer at Shopify. And Shopify culturally is huge on pair programming, and it was something that was encouraged right away, even in my initial onboarding sessions. And so when I joined my team, I was paired up with a senior developer who was appointed as my official mentor. And so he became my point person who I could message on Slack and ask for advice and ask silly questions. And anytime I had a question about something code related, he would offer to jump on a call with me and we would pair on it and we would figure it out together. And similar to my technical coaches at the bootcamp that I went to, he didn't just passively point me to some documentation or tell me exactly what code I needed to be writing, but we would work together to solve the problem. And eventually we were assigned to work on the same project, and we continued pairing more and more, frequently because I would be stuck on something or I would feel like I needed more experienced eyes on what I was working on. And then eventually that pairing process became a part of our regular schedule and the way that we completed work to be done. And during that process, I got to benefit from his expertise and his past experiences. I got to get faster access to internal resources and tooling that I otherwise would not have been aware of or would have had to find on my own. And I also got to grow my confidence in communicating about technical concepts and explaining my technical thought processes in code reviews. And I ultimately just became significantly more comfortable with our code base much more quickly than I would have otherwise. And so after a few weeks of pairing with this person on a regular basis, something really surprising happened. One day on Slack, he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I'm working on this issue and I could use your help." My help. I was shocked. Here was someone with years of experience ahead of me who wanted my opinion about the code that he was writing. And so obviously I said yes, and we hopped on a call. We tried a few different approaches. He listened to my perspective, and we ultimately came up with a better solution together. And this happened more and more frequently until it was clear that we had naturally exited our mentor-mentee relationship and started working as true peers, continuing to pair together and solving difficult technical problems together. And so I started pairing more and more frequently with more and more people on my team. And I eventually transitioned into being a mentor myself and carried that pair programming practice into the way that I approached mentoring. And I ultimately got really excellent feedback from my mentee about how supported she felt during her onboarding process and during her internship that ultimately led to her being able to become a permanent member of our team. And so this is where we really come to the central theme of my talk, which is pair programming as a form of mentorship. And so primarily, I see people treat mentorship as a conversation where you get together and you sit down and you talk with someone for an hour or two, maybe once or twice a week, once or twice a month, and sometimes it gets treated a little bit like a career-focused talk therapy session. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that that personal rapport and that personal relationship is really important to that process. But I think when it comes to being an early career developer, there's so much more value to be had in sitting down with someone who has more experience than you and getting to solve difficult and interesting problems together. When you do that together, you give your mentee the opportunity to build their confidence with your guidance, and they get to practice communicating about technical concepts, showing off where they're really strong, getting to use you as a resource like live and in real time for areas that they're weaker in. And as a mentor, you get to share your knowledge and expertise in real time along the way, and you get to support your mentee through more tangible, practical means than you might otherwise if you were trying to sort of retroactively help them with something in that once-a-week conversation. And so the benefits of this process, though, are not only to the mentee. At some point in this process, and hopefully at many points during your pair programming practice, there will be a role reversal where your mentee will teach you something you didn't know before. Regardless of where someone is in their career, it's always safe to assume that they know something that you don't, and they will probably have experience with some concept or technology or tooling that you're not familiar with, and that gives your mentee the opportunity to do that role reversal and teach you something. And so the knowledge transfer that happens through a pair programming session ultimately flows in both directions. As the mentor, you get that experience of re-solidifying your knowledge about a concept that you might get to approach from a different angle, and your mentee gets to feel supported in their growth and learning along the way. So first of all, I like this quote from Farhan, who's huge on pair programming, has given many talks about it. Highly recommend watching them if you have the opportunity. But pairing is about more than just programming. So why should we be incorporating pair programming into our mentorship practice? A good first step in shifting towards that mental model of mentorship that incorporates pair programming is to take a good look at what the point of mentorship is and what the goal of that relationship is for both of the people involved. And personally, I think the big initial goal in a mentorship relationship is to build trust between two people. And so you're working with, as a mentor with this person, and you need to make them feel comfortable coming to you with their stupid questions. And probably the most influential thing you can do as a mentor is to show your mentee that there are no stupid questions. And an incredible way to build trust with someone is to show them that everyone doesn't know something, or there's always something that someone doesn't know. And it is okay to ask questions, and it's okay to not know things. And creating a system in which someone can feel comfortable asking these questions is a huge, huge first step. And in addition, everything about this communication needs to be intentional. When we all kind of used to work together in the real world, in person, it was easy to keep someone at a literal arm's length from you and work side by side with them. But in a remote-focused world of a global pandemic where we're all sort of working remotely, all communication needs to be incredibly intentional, and this pair programming practice is naturally going to keep that line of communication open and keep you in that constant contact with your mentee. And so fortunately, as I mentioned, pair programming is a really high contact and high fidelity way that you can hit the ground running in building trust with your mentee. You can build that trust right away and start incorporating pair programming into your mentorship practice, and it'll really kind of help build that trust in a few key ways. Firstly, as I mentioned, pairing on a regular basis keeps that contact open. If you're working with someone on a daily basis, you're going to be communicating with them a lot, talking to them every day, and you're naturally going to become significantly more comfortable with this person just naturally through that process. And through that open communication, your mentee is going to get the opportunity to gain confidence in articulating their technical knowledge while having you there as support in that sort of safe space of the mentorship relationship. And pairing also means that you give your mentee an opportunity to see how you really work. They're going to get to see you make mistakes, have a typo, be a real person, which can be incredibly humanizing as someone who's early in their career and feels like there's a lot of pressure to be perfect. But even more than that, they're going to see how you really work in your development environment. They're going to see how you move in your IDE or your code editor. They're going to see all of the aliases that you use or your keyboard shortcuts, or maybe some like really quirky thing about your team's development environment that would be really annoying to deal with in isolation on your own. And you can help them figure that out side by side. And so if your mentee is early in their career, pairing can also be a great way to establish healthy work habits. And so through that pairing schedule that you're going to come up with, you can build in time around professional development and code reviews and taking healthy breaks and like having good focus time and kind of building these habits into that process to kind of help get your mentee on the right foot in their career. And all that to say, not all mentorship relationships happen during onboarding, during onboarding or with people early in their career, but there is still a huge amount of benefit to be found in the pairing process, even if you're not an early career developer or mentoring an early career developer. Let's say you're mentoring someone who's mid-level and they want to become a senior engineer and they need to take on more and more increasingly difficult technical concepts. The same value is going to be found regardless of where you and your mentee are in your career phases. And so we've covered a lot so far about why you should be pair programming, and hopefully you're really excited about it. So we should probably talk about how we pair, how logistically, realistically we're pairing in a remote setting, how that differs from the way that we might pair in person, what habits and routines are we building around pairing, and what tools are available to us to make this process as seamless as possible in a remote setting. The first thing that I would say is to make pairing a part of your regular schedule. Have a shared calendar with your mentee and put your pairing sessions on that calendar. And I personally would recommend pairing as frequently as you possibly can, but that is going to look very different for different people. Some people might have the capacity to pair for hours a day, while others might only have a few hours available a week. But whatever your maximum availability looks like, I would start there. And then obviously remain flexible so that you can account for vacation time and sick time and what other considerations the two people involved might need. And then once you do have that schedule, I encourage you to stick to it. So if you do schedule a pairing session to be an hour long, set that hour timer and finish the session when the hour is up. It can be really tempting to get into a good focus state and just keep going, but without having a plan around how that extended session is going to go, you're going to have a hard time. So I would say to start by sticking to an hour and then increase from there. And then if you do go beyond the hour time frame, use something like a Pomodoro timer so that you can structure in break times. Focus for 25 to 30 minutes, take that 5-minute break, and then get back to focusing. And that way you can leave time for someone to get a drink of water or run to the bathroom without needing to specifically ask for that. And then the other thing that I highly recommend is that around your pairing sessions, leave yourself a 5-minute buffer at the beginning and the end of each session. That way, at the beginning of your session, you have time to communicate about the requirements of the problem space that you're working in, considerations that need to be made, talking about who's going to be driving and navigating, and when and how you'll switch those roles. And then, particularly at the end, leave 5 minutes to give feedback. Feedback is possibly one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your colleagues, and so if nothing else, please do not skip this step. Either take 5 minutes to give written or verbal communication and feedback about how you felt your session went. It can be anything from feeling like your pair was moving too quickly, so you need them to slow down next time, or you really, really liked the way that they communicated some particular concept or explained their thought process around something. Whatever it is, provide that feedback so that you can incorporate it into your next pairing session together. And then similarly to all of the other advice I'm going to give you, take it with a grain of salt and make it work for your situation. So if you are pairing with someone for multiple hours every single day, maybe consistent daily, every session feedback is excessive, and so you give feedback once a week. Whatever that looks like for you, the feedback is the key part here. And so it is also important to understand in terms of pair programming, what roles you can occupy in a given pairing session. And so as I mentioned with the 5-minute opening of your session, you're going to decide who's driving and who's navigating. And so the driver is the person with their hands on the keyboard, writing the code, making sure things are structured correctly, and focusing on the implementation process of what you're working on. And the navigator is the person with the map in their hands. They understand the requirements and the problem scope really deeply, and they maintain focus on the problem rather than the implementation details, and direct more of the technical decision-making around the entire pairing session. And so as a mentor, your initial role in a pairing session will be to navigate. Some of the most important things you can do as a mentor and a navigator is to break down the current task or issue so that you can keep your pair focused on that task. Your job is to understand the problem space more deeply than they do and understand the requirements for the task or issue at hand. And that way you can break those things down into some sort of time-boxed task. That way you can signpost for the driver where you're coming from and where you're going and where you currently are in the process of the task that you're finishing. And so this can be done by prepping something like a Kanban board or a GitHub project board or even bullet points on a Post-it note. Whatever works for you. Coming up with some sort of system of the work that needs to be done will help keep your driver on task and help you do a better job of that navigating process. And so as the driver, your mentee is going to basically immediately get into the process of writing code while having you there to support them in the technical decision-making and kind of guide that process. By having them in the driver's seat, you'll help get them more comfortable with your code base and the development environment and some specific team or organization tooling, and have you there as a live resource for that entire process. But just because your pair is a driver doesn't mean that they shouldn't be involved in some of the decisions being made. Every pairing session should be an open dialogue with lots of discussion and healthy debate and questions about the decisions being made. And this part of the pairing process is often much like a live code review. You get to discuss the implementation in real time and adjust based on feedback as you go. And ultimately, the code that you write during this process will be significantly higher quality because of that continual feedback cycle. So eventually, as your mentee gains more experience and more comfort in the problem space and with your code base, you can provide them with more opportunities to trade roles and allow them to navigate during more of your sessions. The process of switching roles is going to help your mentee gain confidence on both sides of this process. Driving helps them get comfortable with the code base and the tooling and the collaboration process, while navigating will give them more confidence in their own technical decision-making and their own ability to break down a task into component parts. And just make sure that you're consistently checking in with your driver or your mentee or your navigator, depending on how you're switching, and see where their comfort level is within a given problem space. That way, you as the mentor can have a better time of deciding how much of either role they should occupy for a given problem space. So finally, we should cover the tooling and accessibility considerations that we need to make during remote pair programming. Fortunately, there are a huge, wide, vast array of tools available to us to make remote pairing as seamless as possible. Everything from GitHub to Trello to Google Meet to Slack to Tuple can be added to your pairing toolkit depending on your needs. So here are just a few of my favorites. Frequently, I will use Google Meet or Slack huddles to just do a quick screen share or to chat with someone really quickly to talk about some concept or idea before we really get into pairing. But those do have their limitations around how interactive that screen share is. And so that's where Tuple comes in, which is probably our most frequently used pairing tool at Shopify. It's a screen sharing software that allows for multiple participants, multiple cursors, multiple people to be typing at a time. And you can even throw confetti at people when they do something really awesome. And then GitHub is the obvious choice for code sharing and publishing. It's pretty self-explanatory. You push, you pull, you get your changes. And then Google Docs are really great for collaborating on technical design. You can have multiple people remotely editing the same doc, and so often I will get on a voice call with someone, we'll work on some technical design, and then we'll hop into Tuple to actually work on the code. And so all of these tools and techniques are excellent in their own right, but we have yet to talk about something really important, which is accessibility in pair programming. Pairing remotely and pairing in general brings up a significant number of accessibility concerns and considerations for a lot of individuals. Some people might require closed captioning so that they can communicate due to hearing impairment, while other people might need to communicate exclusively in writing. Conditions ranging from ADHD and autism to hearing impairment and physical disabilities can raise all kinds of concerns when it comes to pairing. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you here, and the most overarching piece of advice that I hope you take away from this entire talk, is to just maintain good communication and empathy for your colleagues. Before pairing with anyone on your team, ask them about their accessibility concerns and their needs, even if you don't think that they have any. Many disabilities are completely invisible, and we have no way of knowing what someone's access needs are without asking them. And taking that step to ask about access needs up front removes the burden from the disabled individual to need to advocate for themselves, which is incredibly important. As a personal anecdote, I work with, or have worked with, a friend and a teammate who is nonverbal autistic. She had access needs ranging from needing to collaborate over Google Meet specifically so that we could see each other face to face. She needed more time to be able to type in the chat so that she could communicate effectively. She needed to ask more clarifying questions, and even had considerations that I needed to make on my own side to prevent triggering noise and background noise on my end of the call. And ultimately, these considerations were small adjustments that I had to make pairing even possible for this person at all. Without asking for these access needs and making these adjustments, our typical pairing setup would have been completely inaccessible for her. And so the adjustments that we make for someone's access needs are similar to adjustments we might make during any other part of this process, whether it's taking break times to get water, or take a comfort break, or just understanding what someone's knowledge level is in a given space. All of these things simply require us to maintain open communication and empathy for our colleagues so that we can all work together as effectively as possible and with the right level of access and support for our unique needs. So at this point, you should have a pretty good idea of the why and the how of pair programming, particularly in the context of mentorship. But I don't want you to leave this talk thinking that pairing is only valuable within that context. Pair programming is something that should be utilized at all levels and not exclusively as a part of your onboarding or mentorship processes. Some of the biggest benefits of pairing carry through all stages of your career and through all phases of development work. Pairing is an extremely high fidelity way to build and share context with your colleagues, and to keep your code under constant review, and to combine the strengths of multiple developers on a single piece of work and a shared goal. As you progress through your career, pairing can become even more valuable because the level of complexity of the problems that you're going to face is only going to increase, and you will eventually reach the upper limit of what you can accomplish in isolation. It's true what they say, 2 heads are better than 1. And another Farhan quote, but this really sums up what I've been trying to drive home here. You should only pair program when you want intensely focused, effective engineers to write high-quality software, to learn from each other, and to share domain knowledge. And who wouldn't want that? So in summation, you should be pairing more. You should pair with your mentee, with your own mentor, and with your colleagues as much as you possibly can. And hopefully now you feel more confident in the when and why and how of how to do that. So hi, thank you so much for being here. You can find me everywhere online as the Code Pixie, like literally everywhere. That's who I am on the internet. And so stay safe, take care, and remember to pair. I believe we have time for questions if anyone has questions. And if not, yeah, absolutely. What's up? Yeah. So I'm going to repeat your question for the recording. So you're asking about when to give feedback, whether you think you should give it immediately or leave some kind of like a buffer time for comfort for both people. And so I think that is ultimately related to the open communication aspect of things, where you can make that decision for yourself. That might vary from person to person. Some people might want feedback immediately, and that might be how they best receive feedback. And for other people, they might need more time to think about what their feedback is going to be, or they need more of a buffer zone before receiving feedback. And so you can just ask, basically, what someone's comfort level is, and then go from there. It would be my advice. Yeah, of course. Anybody else? Yeah, I think modeling feedback is a really good way to ask for feedback. Personally, I tried to initially in my interactions with my mentee provide positive feedback as frequently as possible. And then in our actual one-on-ones together, I would try to leave some time basically for me to ask her for feedback. Not like so pointedly, but to kind of get her into the process of like, this is what feedback sounds like, and this is what a feedback loop looks like. So I think just modeling really good feedback helps. And then depending on the person, you can ask really pointedly. It just depends. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think actually in my answer to your question about how to ask for feedback, I kind of discounted the fact that because I do follow this model of pairing, feedback is already built in. There's that 5 minutes at the end where I am specifically asking you for feedback. And so you will get specific feedback about the pairing session. And then you can also do something similar to get just general feedback from somebody. I think that's a really excellent point. Love that. Thank you. Do you want to repeat that for the recording? Yeah, absolutely. So what you had said is, I don't remember already, sorry. I asked for just one piece of specific feedback. Ask for one piece of specific feedback. That is very good advice. Yeah, so how do we keep someone engaged if they're feeling shy or they're less vocal? I think that also relates to just asking questions. So the more that you talk to them, the more they'll have to talk back to you. And so if you are the navigator, you obviously will be consistently communicating about the work that you're doing, but if you are seeing a decision being made or a process happening, you can ask, leading questions about what this person is doing and what their thought processes are. Or if you are driving and they're observing you, you can ask for their feedback about what you just did, and kind of get them involved in more of like a conversation, just by asking leading questions. Cool. Do you mind if I repeat that? Yeah, so what Haley, right? Hillary said, is to ask what questions someone might have rather than if they have questions, because you can always assume that they probably do have questions. So if you ask for the question specifically, rather than if they have any, you're more likely to get a better response. Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of relates back to that 5-minute buffer that I was talking about. Like, you can totally use that for casual conversation or just to chat. And if that is something that you feel like helps ease you into a pairing session, you can also just build in time for that, to have that sort of casual, shoot the breeze, small talk conversation and kind of get more comfortable with each other that way too. That totally makes sense. Cool. We have about 30 seconds left, so I think that's it for questions. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for the excellent questions. Feel free to come and chat with me about pair programming or anything else you might be interested in talking about while you're here.